So this is Bardejovské Kúpele, but I don't exactly know where to go. So what I'll probably do is just follow all those people going that way. Apparently it's a World Heritage Site or something akin to that. And I'm guessing that I think there are two churches out here plus the Skansen. So there you see the Skansen. And here's a church, obviously, that's one. There's a ski area, but I think I'll pass on that since there's no snow. And I don't want to ski. I forgot my skis. Go wandering up this way. Kind of a pretty little monument, don't know what it's for. I don't exactly know what this relatively new structure is for, except that down these stairs, I mean it's well built, are two older looking fountains. And that's it. Now maybe they were original fountains. We'll go down and take a closer look at them. Maybe these were the community's original water sources, converted now to a more modern view, but notice the discoloration from whatever chemicals, probably iron, that's in the water. But other than that, there's nothing here. A couple of old places like this that I've seen, whether they used to be fountains or whatever, I don't know. There appear to be pensions, lots of restaurants here, so I'm guessing it's a fairly large complex. Maybe it's an old village, you would think, although the churches, I believe, were deconstructed, brought here, and reconstructed wherever they are. But there's several pensions I've seen already. Kind of cute, a little hobbit-like community of mushrooms that change color apparently according to how much moisture they get. Here another nearby colony. Looks like a building that was originally just an Hungarian building, and I'm just guessing at that underlying architecture, and then having this Victorian facade put on it. It's pretty. You can see there's nothing in English. This suggests a restoration project. Just kind of roaming on the assumption I'll find what I'm looking for if I keep walking far enough. This is a pretty building. We'll go up and take a closer look at that. And a modern structure here. Probably a hotel, majestic looking. How old it is, I don't know. It's a pretty environment. This looks like a lovely presentation or theater type of context. The Astoria Hotel, which is what that's named, apparently appealing to many countries, including the United States and Britain and Canada, but it chooses not in any way at all to give any instruction in English. I keep harping on that because in my mind, if you aspire to tourism as a destination point, surely you have to recognize, or should have recognized at some point, that English is becoming the international language. Choose not to, or appear not to, it's either arrogance or ignorance. Now this is interesting because it says Dukla, which was the site of I think a Second World War battle that's famous, but that's quite some distance from here, up near Svikna, probably 35 kilometers. Skansen I recognize, so we'll keep going the same direction. It's a Sunday, relatively quiet, people dressed very nicely. It certainly has all the appearance of a destination area, but for what, I have not yet been able to determine. Sign said Skansen this way, so we'll hang a left. What oppresses me as an ignorant American coming to Slovakia is how well maintained it is. It's very well done. I'd put this in a first class First Nation status on that basis alone. And this is just more evidence of, again, a revelation primarily in contrast to my own American ignorance. Well, intuition and some local signage pays off. The gentleman here has told me this is the Greek Catholic church, and the Orthodox will be up there to our right further on. Church, notice that little tower back there. But this church is particularly pretty and interesting because number one, it has 3 towers. They seem to be tiered, and by that I mean they're levels, and they have coloration as well as design elements. And notice this Greek Catholic has that strange kind of cross on it. Now here we have 2 kinds, unless one's just broken, where they have 3 horizontal bars. The one on the right, perhaps the right hand bar is broken off, I don't know, in the middle. This tower is interesting in part because of this clock, which is painted on and has its hands frozen at 12:30. Either that or 6 o'clock.
najmä tie, ktoré najviac potrebujú Tvoje milosrdenstvo. Oče náš, ktorý si na nebesiach, posväť sa meno Tvoje, byť kráľovstvo Tvoje, nám dnes a odpúsť nám naše viny, ako i my odpustili na veky vekov. Amen.
Šťastnú hodinu smrti. Raduj sa, Bohorodička Panna Mária, milosti plná, Pán s Tebou, požehnaná si medzi ženami a požehnaný je plod Tvojho života.
Lebo si porodila Krista, Spasiteľa a Vykupiteľa nášho.
The man gave me a hint is this. The crosses are indicative of 3 different kinds. This is the Greek, and apparently the Greek Catholic, but the Greek Orthodox, the bottom one slants down. I'm not sure I picked up on what the 3rd one was. The gentleman I encountered coming up here, and I'm just panning right now to have some way to talk, invited me into the church. I went in and sat, and got that footage. I'll go out of this church compound and around to the left over there somewhere and enter the scanson proper and properly, and then come back here later. I don't know what this older building is. Looks like it's been here for some time rather than moved on site from somewhere else. but maybe someday it'll be restored. The gentleman who took me to the church was first of all looking in the door and windows. Cruel to say it, and I don't intend it that way, but it's an inspiration to see people who are younger than I am, but weaker than I am, struggling up hills and out of breath. It inspires me to keep trying to do whatever I can physically, no matter what energy I have to expend. I think here we enter the scansen and another church there. Okay, this is my third scansen in Eastern Europe trip, and we'll begin the journey. This is interesting. Notice there that pillar on the side. That's something to be aware of. What we're going to see now is buildings and artifacts that are Slovakian, not Romanian, where I saw the first several scansen. Now this is interesting. I've seen of these. This is a chimney created out of branches and mud. So it was apparently protected. Now probably it was designed in such a way that there was never enough heat to start those things kindling on fire, but enough to allow the smoke to leave. This build was also a residence or not, I don't know, but I'm guessing it was. This would be the oven and stove. Yes, it's laid out that way too. There, suspended child's crib, bed. This room probably served all functions. And frankly, it's 2 to 3 or 4 times bigger than my van, so why shouldn't it? Like the Cunningham cabin, this interior portion, probably for animals to give them shelter, but not total shelter in the wintertime. A small version of a press, noticing rather than screw press, this uses this wedging, and then you hammer the wedging in, and that creates the pressure. This probably some kind of grinding stone. That's interesting that it's in this kind of wood, for lack of a better term, table or cabinetry. Intrigues me about these hand instruments and implements is that someone sweated with those things, that embedded in those implements are the salts that exuded from this person's body and now are impregnated in those things. Someday they'll tell a story, perhaps. Interesting that adjacent to the house proper is this room that was intentionally built, obviously, for keeping something. Critters, whatever, looks like probably critters, but who knows? But that's valuable space, so it must have been more valuable than for living purposes. Notice that this pipe is a flue that comes from the top of the stove. So this is a modification I haven't seen before, and that accommodated this. That's what this was for, was just to allow that heated smoke out. Small room over there is apparently the pantry for storing foodstuffs and tools. This carved statue, if you will, is not an integral part of the building. Whether it was part of the home environment of these poor peasants, I don't know, but it certainly represents a culture that prized aesthetic, not to mention the skill it took to create what is a pretty aesthetic. And you wonder, is this Mary and Jesus, the little critter off to the left there? Is this something the man or woman happened to have a skill at, or did they buy it and add it, or is it just totally unrelated to this place? And how do you not enjoy a day like this? I mean, how do you do it? And how insipid would be my normal day anywhere else in the United States in my home context? Not because it's the United States, but because it's where I live. It's the same thing I've always done for years now. Was this a little village roadside chapel? In my cynicism, I have to be careful to recognize that in these days, which were primitive for all intents and purposes compared to the explosive upward curve of civilization in the last couple hundred years, that you were very, very close to nature and the raw power that you believed God controlled. You consider the fears that can plague us in our modern days with all of the protections we have created for ourselves, including insurance. You can imagine that as these people went through their day, they had similar kinds of fears, but even more present, perhaps more ominous, and far less understood. So having a moment to say hello to God was pretty damn important. At first glance, this looks like a ladder, but it's not, because this slat is fairly thin, and then it's just these smaller branches in between. So probably it was something for drying. Look at these pitchforks made from trees that a person would have hunted out for this specific purpose. Taken them into the house in the evenings or in the wintertime and fashioned them into those implements, and then used them. And therein lies the rub. That would be hard work. And yet, they made it somehow a bit easier. Okay, so here we see what that ladder device is for. It's the side of a wagon. That burn spot, what's the story behind that? How did it get away from somebody, that fire? And imagine, as rough as these look, they made life measurably better. Can you imagine using this with your horse in front, or two, maybe? No, I just think one. And that would take you into town on blustery nights. Imagine the nights that were so horrific. And yet southern nights so beautiful, but cold, and all bundled up with your family next to you, helping you to keep you warm. But having confidence in that horse, confidence that you could always walk back if you had to. Dad would make it happen. This enclosure was for animals, right? I would too, except there's no way in for an animal. So the most that it could be is you'd crawl in there and store stuff, I guess. The overhang of the roof provided an opportunity for an additional wall for more storage. Seat on some kind of wagon, and perhaps this one right here that we're looking at. Maybe it allowed you to, yeah, that would have fit on some kind of crossbars or some kind of bars. A locking mechanism for the door, somehow. How tranquil it looks. How peaceful, like the man had gone away for vacation and left it neat so it would be neat when he came back. There are large bellows, and there are smaller bellows, I think. Correct, that bellows leads into that, what would be the stove or furnace area. You can see how darkened the ceiling is from the smoke by what's been chipped away occasionally. I can only imagine what these tools were used for, but more importantly, the skill it took to use simple tools like this to create truly useful and effective implements. This man and his craft may have been equivalent to the computer repairman and diagnostician and programmer and all those things wrapped up into one. He fashioned this use of a rough shoe for some particular purpose. You can imagine that all around this neat-looking building would have been wagons and other implements in various states of needed repair. Looks like a combination house and barn, the house being the portion we're looking at now. Probably storage up above. And then this, either garage or barn. A look inside this house. Notice not too wide a house, although I'll go around to the side and see if it extends beyond that wall. Here a massive stove. And notice that flue again. I hadn't noticed that in any of the structures in Romania. Imagine the welcome refuge of that bench over there. Or that bench on the stove, if in fact it wasn't covered with pots. After a blustery cold day or morning of work, and you came in for lunch. And imagine what lunch was like. There's a room back there. Let's go see if we can see inside. Can't see inside, but my guess is from the size of it, this small dimension, that it's analogous to the pantry we saw in the more modest home early on. Every log is numbered so we know its place, both for its restoration and anything to be done in the future. Now I can hear people singing inside that church. Hopefully I'll spend enough time looking at everything else that when I'm done, the services will be done and I can go inside. A little well house is kind of cute. Notice held together with the wooden pegs, no nails here. Go over and take a look at this. Whether it's a house and or barn, I don't know for sure yet. Furniture apparently from the 1920s. Now remember, 1920s in this small village. So it's still going to be quite rustic. Notice the decoration on the walls, still done today. But how they might have been prized. And would those bowls have been from earlier generations within the family? Heirlooms? Imagine the labor extended by Mom and the kids on that butter churn. Not to mention that little gizmo. What is that for? These implements we can divine that a hoe, but the other one is probably for pulling bread out from inside the oven. There was no further pipe than that one right there. And the smoke just came out and drifted up through there. Notice how that looks like a combination of maybe tar, but certainly plaster and straw. But maybe it's black like that, not because of tar, but perhaps there was a covering over some of this, keeping all of the smoke working its way up instead of drifting down here, although it was a natural flue with the openness of this building. Our pantry, you can see when they talk about implements, they're not those wimpy little pots we have. Those are big babies. Much room on this design for this side portion for storage. Like a chopper for something. Was it for grain? Or something that you put draped over it and then use this to chop it in half. That's interesting. Some kind of simple press. You just lifted this up and then pushed that thing down on top of whatever was inside. It would work. It may just be a grinding stone for implements, or it might be for grain of some sort, but I don't see how the second stone was there unless there's another stone underneath. But notice that it was driven by a pedal. So presumably there's some gearing there that we can't see that caused this thing to turn when you worked the pedal or treadle. Why this little wagon? Was it really just something for a kid? Or was it to get a kid involved in helping with the farm work by having his own little wagon to pull stuff about? But it's a pretty sturdy little thing. There's no slouch of an effort to create. Here a working wagon. Could haul people with that bench, but also haul anything else, because could pop the bench up out of the way and fill the whole inside with what you needed. Maybe they could use that to feed livestock out in the fields in the wintertime. Of course, imagine the amount of hay and so forth you could get up on top. And was fire an issue? You better believe it. This is interesting. It's a hollowed out log turned into a big giant barrel with its own little lid. What would that have been used for? To put more precious goodies in? To keep little teeny varmints out of them? Wow, that's an interesting innovation I haven't seen. This here, some deference paid to aesthetic. Wheelwright had his little bit of taste aesthetic. There it's closed up and locked, but my guess is, from the looks of that there's something quite elegant inside of it. Maybe a more elegant carriage of some sort. Completely out of context, I would suggest. Well, I hear music issuing from there, but it appears that all doors are locked. Including the door to the front of the church. In a minute, it looks like there might be access from over there for some reason. So maybe this is blocked off from the museum part during actual services and then opened up when services are done. We can hope. If this is just some kind of meeting hall, or was it a bell tower? We'll go inside and maybe we can learn more inside. I'm guessing it was a bell tower. Bell towers were not just for churches. They were also a means by which you signaled the community that it had to gather for something, either an emergency like a fire or some other kind of important gathering. And it's quite possible that with these bench-like supports that it served that function. Interesting to see how it doesn't appear that that vertical huge piece of wood is in any way at all attached to this horizontal one or ones, although there are large metal something or others, nails or whatever, that appear to be holding things together. Yeah, that's metal. Church behind me, and the first church we looked at over to our left. I'm going to walk into this blue complex, for lack of a better term. It's this implement here. It's a large rolling log, if you will. Maybe designed to flatten out a field or knock down hay, or who knows. I wonder if there are books anywhere or anything on the internet that explains antique farm implements. Okay, these are obviously plastered, and with that blue color that my friend yesterday was trying to explain the source of the coloring, and he was unable to put it into English. But we've seen this before. Oftentimes it's log that's covered over with stucco. Again, stuccoed on the inside. Notice how carefully it goes up and rounds around these corners to make sure it's completely sealed off. Here that's divided into bins for different products, no doubt. We can only wonder at how these implements were used. That one, of course, looks obvious. But of that one there, and that device, which looks like a big brush in the center of something, not double-handled, except that looks like it would have been part of another machine that allowed it to slide up and down a couple of shafts, and it might have been quite an interesting piece when it was freshly painted. This is a rather long and narrow structure, but it still probably serves both functions, house and barn. Little flower trying to hide away inside this fence. House is a little bit different. This is one big room. Doesn't have a stove in it, but it might have been interconnected with this center room here, which looks like it serves specifically as a kitchen. And then another room over here, which does have a stove. So maybe you would sleep in the room that didn't have the stove, because you could stay warm under the covers. Notice the classic shoe tree. Let's take a closer look at these devices here, the chair. Notice the design. Was it literally designed that way, as a handle, as well as something to hold cushions perhaps attached to that? This is a pestle and mortar. Did you eat from wooden spoons? The barn, and this certainly was for animals. Here it indicates horses, I suspect, although that could be for, no, I think horses. Oxen would seem to have too big a neck for that. But notice how it's designed for slop of some sort to funnel down through the wood and then perhaps into that trough and out of the building somehow. And there, a long trough made from a log for water and or feed, as well as hay thrown up on top there. You would think there would have been the innovation of a gap in that floor for throwing the hay down from up above. Here, a sturdier and more refined wagon than we've seen. One that looks like it's been milled in a specific way, maybe a replicatable way, by, let's say, a manufacturer of this kind of device. This design, I suggest, for 2 horses. Notice the RD twists and turns, curly cues of the metalwork, again indicating an elevation of something from merely a work device to an aesthetic work device. These probably, again, being our cross pieces, because this wagon probably had a capability of being used for several rack for holding chairs for people to ride in, but then when you didn't need that and you needed it as a work wagon, you just pulled those off, hung them up, and then you could fill it with wood, grain, whatever you needed. Interesting innovation. It looks as though you could fill up that upper portion with something, let's say grain of some sort, and then be able to get at it easily from the outside with this door and chute mechanism. What have we here? I don't know. It's a large metal disc in the center there for something. These 2 poles attached to it. Guess is that these 2 posts here somehow were attached to animals that would walk around, causing the gear mechanism to turn this shaft, which in turn caused that gear mechanism to turn, and those power off takes there. Unless it's exactly the opposite of that, and that you attach some kind of power mechanism to here, a motor of some sort. Notice how this equivalent of what we see in automobiles. So I don't know if this preceded the automobile or not, but that linkage is familiar. It suggests that these machines were used between the First and Second World War. Now, talk about design. Really power takeoff, so there was some kind of motor available. Then you would think so, obviously, at that time. Kind of hay storage. Allowed air to pass through, but they suggested that these walls are mortared in here because of the thrashing that went on. I'm not quite sure how that relates because I don't know anything about thrashing. This is interesting. You wonder what the story is behind this. Was it just one individual's penchant for carving, or were there several? And is there some purpose behind these? And what are the logs for? Then again, are they just kind of wood barrels made from hollow trees like we saw earlier? No reason to suspect they're not. This one, in spite of having metal gearing, they still use wood gearing. So it illustrates a transition, but for economic reasons, technical reasons, functional reasons. Now leaving this barn, notice how it's well protected from electricity. Look at these few buildings here. So this very pretty building was both a pigsty and a chicken coop. I'm guessing the chickens lived up on the second floor and the pigs were down in this lower section here. And it was on this foundation so that I guess urine and so forth would fall through the cracks. But apparently this building would have been right opposite a stable, and assuming the stable to be behind me, somewhere in here would be a dung heap. In other words, where you'd throw the manure from the pigs and from the horses into this area so that then you could use it, I'm guessing, on your fields. Again, some of these huge trees gives us an idea of what the original forest probably looked like around here. I'm not sure you'll find trees this big anymore. They just hollowed themselves out, as trees tend to do, unless they had a process of burning them out. Barrel maker, it's got the bottom with planks, and you wonder if it's not notched right down in there. So you see how this angles in right here from here to there, how it could have fit in there like that. Could this have been used for holding water or some other kind of important fluid in quite a considerable volume? You'll notice the considerable overhang to this pigsty to provide working area during inclement weather. Now we'll look at this building. Real surprises here. This is a little bit bigger room than we've seen before. And here this is a more expanded device. Now notice how this is used here. This is interesting. This comes down here presumably by turning you could rotate this thing by turning that, and then things ground probably inside this cavity. Same thing here for a smaller stone. That's interesting. Looks to be a flue from a stove inside that room, smaller room. That crenellated embellishment on top of that oven or stove. And look at the different levels here. Did they create different amounts of heat? Well, that one's just a table there, so there's no heat there, except it maybe gets heat from the stove and keeps things warm. And that, of course, is a stove there too. I should be more precise. That's a stove, and maybe the rest is called an oven. Is that a big slicing device? Got two arms on that pestle there. So it didn't weigh as much, but it could be bigger and do more work. A rough little bed, but who cares when it's comfortable? I wonder what is this area squared off with square bricks. Was there a freestanding stove of some sort there? Continue down to this area.